Welcome to Bonnie's Beat. I'm your host, Bonnie Squires. We're coming to you from Radnor Studio 21, mainline television in beautiful downtown Wayne. We like to showcase people who are doing important things in the community, whether it's politics or a charity or fundraising for a worthy cause. But I like to bring important people into the studio. And today, I've got somebody who's terrific in a lot of ways. His name is Dr. Daniel Loeb. Those of us who know him well call him Dan. And he's here to talk about a few things, but his primary passion right now is called Fair Districts PA. Is that correct, Dan?
That's right.
Okay. He's fighting gerrymandering. All right. Dan, tell us how you got involved with the fight to have fair districts, political districts.
Well, I've always followed politics very closely, come from a family that followed the news. It's been politically engaged. Apparently, I had a McGovern button on my
your diaper.
stroller. Not quite the diaper, but the stroller. But the my training is as a mathematician. I have a PhD from MIT, and
where'd you go to undergraduate?
Caltech. So I did both coasts, both of
East Coast, West Coast.
Right. I got the beaver, the engineering beaver from both schools. It's the engineer of nature.
That's
the
an
beaver.
Interesting ring.
Right.
And Beaver College changed their name to Arcadia, which was so foolish. But anyway.
Well, anyhow, you got to own it. So, but the redistricting is a part of my mathematical research that I've conducted. I spent 6 years in academia teaching in France, but now
Is that how you met your wife, Aileen?
I met her in Israel while I was still a student, and then I ended up going to France in part because of her.
Oh, I never knew. His wife is so delicious, and I get to speak Francais. I get to parler Francais with her whenever I'm with her. But I never thought to ask how you met each other. So, What was she doing in Israel?
She was working in a kibbutz.
And what were you doing in Israel?
I was doing a summer research at the Weizmann Institute, Mechon Weizmann, and we both took a week off for a camp, a Zionist camp, and we were writing back and forth, and then we started visiting, and that's the story of that.
And 4 kids later.
Yep, right, and
a lot of trips back to France for relatives, right?
That's right.
Israel.
That's right, and redistricting. Redistricting is an international concept because perhaps I should start from the beginning. Redistricting is the idea that countries divide themselves into parts for the purpose of voting. You have a legislator there, and he's responsible for that area. There's legislators in other parts that are responsible for their parts. And you want there to be a rough equality between the number of people in an area and how many legislators they get.
Now, in America, let's focus on congressional districts. So each congressperson in Pennsylvania is supposed to represent how many thousands of voters?
It's, I think, about
700,000. Is it voters or bodies?
It's actually bodies, and that's very clear because from the beginning, they said how women and Indians were completely counted, even though they couldn't vote. Blacks who couldn't vote were counted as 3/5 of a person. So, I mean, the concept of counting people who couldn't vote was already enshrined in the Constitution. And therefore, as a result, we still count minors, we count convicts, we count people who are sick and unable to get to the ballot, resident aliens, even illegal aliens. If you are a person and you are present, you have to be counted. And if you're a citizen and you're abroad, you should be counted too as well.
And the way people are counted, this is every 10 years, there's
Yes, the decennial census. It's the April.
There's a census
every 10 years.
Every 10 years. And as a result of the census, they divide up the districts.
So there's two parts. So first of all, the districts, they count up the people according to the census. The census is conducted in April, and then there's follow-up census to get the people that they didn't catch. The numbers are only finalized at the end of the year. So for the April 2020, there's going to be a census. You'll get a form in the mail. You have to return it. If you don't, in May and June, people are going to start knocking on your door and saying, why didn't you return it? At the end of the year, the numbers should be finalized. And in January, the clerk of the House of Representatives will do some math and figure out how many states are awarded. There's 435 representatives. And now it turns out that
in Washington,
in the United States,
in Congress.
Right, in Congress. Now, they're going to divide the population of the United States by 435. Typically, that will not result in a whole number of people. And then the populations of each of those states aren't going to be multiples of whatever that number is. So there's a little bit of math involved because, no state can be awarded 1.5 representatives. It's going to either be one or two. And most states would prefer to have two than to have one.
And right now, Pennsylvania's down to only 18.
Right, and we're going to have 17. Where before that, this will be, I think, the 4th or 5th consecutive cycle that we've lost at least one representative.
Because I remember when we had 21, 22.
Right, and it's not so much that Pennsylvania has lost population. It's really a factor that we haven't gained population as much as other states have. Certainly, some parts of Pennsylvania have lost population.
And the sad part is we used to have one woman out of the whole congressional delegation. Now we have none. No women.
Right.
How's that possible? The women are so smart.
Well, I think it's the men who are drawing the lines. No, we'll get to that with the redistricting, and you might want to also interview somebody from Emily's list. They're doing good work to promote women on both sides of the aisle.
I'm very involved, with the Genevieve Society. It was named in honor of the late Genevieve Blatt, who was the first woman statewide judge elected. She also ran against Senator Hugh Scott. She came very close to being the first woman senator from Pennsylvania, but she lost. But we've got a society that encourages women, Republicans and Democrats, to stand for, run for office, to stand for board appointments, because there's a nonprofit in New York called The Catalyst, and they do a report every year. And unfortunately, every year, the percentage of women on national boards, on the Forbes 500 boards, is shrinking. Instead of progressing, we're going backwards. So, tell us about the fair districts.
Right.
Who's in charge of fair districts?
So it's a coalition of a number of civic organizations. The two lead organizations are Common Cause PA and the League of Women Voters. But if you go to their website...
And the League of Women Voters is strictly nonpartisan.
Right, as is Common Cause.
Yeah.
And then there are other organizations that have joined as sponsoring organizations. You're the president of the Philadelphia Jewish Voice, and last year we passed a resolution to endorse Fair District PA's proposals.
How did that happen? Since Dan Loeb is the founder and publisher of the online Philadelphia Jewish Voice, I'm just the president of the board. But that was an interesting coincidence that Dan, fresh off of one of his forays into and testimonials into fair districts, we happened to vote to,
right.
yes.
And in fact, I testify, this has been a long time an interest for me. I testified in Harrisburg in 2011 on the previous redistricting cycle. are required to have hearings.
Not that it means anything.
Right. You notice that the hearings are not called listenings. The full committee, perhaps I should mention how the redistricting is done. So I mentioned the clerk of the House of Representatives says every state how many they get. That used to be very controversial. The first presidential veto, George Washington's first veto, I think one of only 2 or 3, was against a reapportionment plan because, if you get an extra representative, that's good for your state. Now there's a formula, and sometimes it works out to your favor, sometimes it doesn't, but people might not even be the best formula, but it's a formula, and it's an impartial formula, and people have been following it. Then the question is, if a state like Pennsylvania is going to have 18 districts, which is now going to be reduced to 17, we're going to have to draw new lines. Incidentally, even if it stayed at 18, you still would have to draw new lines because within Pennsylvania, some parts will have gained population, some will have lost. So while we're doing the congressional redistricting, and that's really where a lot of people focus on, people can get away with a lot more with the state House and the state Senate districts, which get redistricted at the same time. There are 50 state Senate districts. There's 203 state House districts, although there's some legislation going around to lower that, I think, to 153. But in either case, even if it stays at 203, there's going to be a lot of line drawing because it's not going to be the same 203.
And not only that, but somebody who is in office may discover that he or she is no longer in the district that they were elected to.
Right.
Then they have to decide, and Allison Schwartz went through this. She had to sell her house that she lived in and raised her kids in and move to another district in order to be, still in. And
once
in
you
Congress.
do that, you can be sure that your opponent is going to call you a carpetbagger. Now, so the ability to draw these lines is a very strong power because I've got a drawing here. I don't know if you can zoom in on it. We've got 3 maps here. In the map on the top is the actual districts for the state of Pennsylvania. It looks almost entirely red, but I can assure you that out of the 18 districts, there are 5 blue ones. So there's 5 Democrats and 13 Republicans. So there's a Democratic district out there in Pittsburgh. There's a couple here in Pennsylvania, and then there's one out here like in the Poconos area. And now, if you take the same people, don't change how they're going to vote, just draw new lines, you can make districts here. These are districts that were drawn by Dalen Leach. The same people.
State Senator Dalen Leach is very involved with trying to guarantee fair districting from the next census.
Yeah, so with the same people, nobody's changing their vote. They're just changing where the lines are placed. Now you have 13 Democrats and 5 Republicans. And
I like that.
Right. And obviously, if you wanted to be fair, you could have 9 Democrats and 9 Republicans, which is really what represented. This is based, I think, on the 2012 election, in which the Democrats won a slight majority of the vote. So given that we have 18 seats, you would think that fairness would say that the Democrats would pick up 9, maybe 10 seats. But in fact, they only got 5. And the way they do that is a technique called partisan gerrymandering. There's several reasons why you might want to gerrymander. One reason is because you want to have as many seats as possible for your team, and you do that. You don't necessarily you look at people and how they're going to vote, and you don't say I'm going to change my policies to appeal to them more. What you're going to say is I'm going to pack them away in places where they're not going to hurt me. So either there's so many people, let's say in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, that there's no way you can avoid losing a district there. So you're going to say, well, since I'm going to lose, I want to run up the score. I want to throw in every Democrat I can find into that district and if possible, make a district where there wasn't a single Republican. So maybe you'll end up with a district with 95% Democrat, and in Philadelphia, you have two districts. Those two districts together, if the lines were drawn differently, could easily make three districts. But there's enough Democrats in those two districts to win three districts, but they're trapped into two districts. Then conversely, there are other areas, Democratic strongholds in smaller cities like Harrisburg, Reading, Scranton. And if it was a district centered around those towns, it would probably be a Democratic district, or at least a competitive district. So what they do is they draw it into sectors. You have a little slice of Harrisburg mixed together, watered down with enough rural voters that it's a safe Republican district. And then you do the same with the other parts of Harrisburg. And so that's called cracking. So there's the favorite techniques of the partisan gerrymanders are the packing and the cracking.
Packing and cracking, I love it.
But then, as you alluded with the where somebody lives, you can use it for to enforce party discipline. If somebody isn't voting, the lines are often drawn by the party leadership. So the party leadership, if you don't vote exactly the way your party leadership wants to vote, they can take you out of your district. They can take a Republican legislator and have a little tentacle reaching out of Philadelphia down the median strip of some highway, ending right at his house. And now, instead of running his district, he's going to have to run in some Philadelphia district where he wouldn't have a chance.
The interesting thing is, the last redistricting, there was a congressional district created that started at Ballackinwood, ended up in Reading, Pennsylvania. It looked like some prehistoric monster the way it was designed, and it went through 5 counties. So how can you possibly campaign in 5 different counties? The needs are different, the demographics are different. I forget which one that is. Whose district is that? It might be Meehan's district.
Well, Meehan's district is known as the if I can find that here, the Meehan's district is on the very right-hand side of this is being cut off. You can see most of the district there. Perhaps you can provide a link to it somewhere. Actually, this is being used in this slideshow that's kind of small, but so here is Meehan's district. It's this orange blob. And there was a contest. Washington Post had a contest to name various districts and to see what had the most creative name. They gave this the name Donald Kicking Minnie. And so you see Donald Duck sort of lying on his back, kicking Minnie. Kicking Goofy. And you see some of the places. There's an accepted judicial principle that districts have to be connected. That every part of the district is, you can walk, you can draw a line from one place in a district to another without leaving your district.
It looks like some of them are one block.
Right. There's
one block
point.
wide.
I think there's one point here in which there's a store, and there's no way to get from one side of the district to the other side of the district without going through that store. and it's so contorted because what they're trying to do is take a big part of this Republican area to the west of Philadelphia, but avoiding some of the Democratic areas like Westchester, which is in this blank area over here, Lancaster, and then Reading up there.
But I want to make sure people understand, it's not just Republicans that do this, because I have a friend who had considered running for a state Senate seat in Philadelphia as a Democrat. He had been a long time state rep. The person that he was going to challenge in the primary had the redistricting. I guess he had influence with the Republicans. And it's sort of like they drew a box around my friend's house so that
Pull him
he
out.
was no longer in that senatorial district. I told him that they did him a favor, but still, these
Right.
kinds of things on both sides, both parties are guilty of these redistricting shenanigans.
And in fact, when you're doing a partisan redistricting and packing somebody into a district that's safe beyond the wildest dreams of being safe, where you have over 90% of the people in your party supporting you, there's quite a few people who could be the person representing that district. So if the people drawing the lines need an extra vote, they could conceivably offer that seat to a renegade member of the other party who's willing to vote for something that would ensure them a very safe seat, even though the plan numerically is going to be very bad for their party. And then there's also the bipartisan redistricting. So you think of like a bipartisan health care or bipartisan budget.
Sounds good. Sounds
That's
good.
very good. The bipartisan redistricting is probably even worse than the partisan redistricting. So the idea is, let's say I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat. I'm going to say, well, I won a tough election, and I'd like to get reelected, but I don't want to do all the work that I had to do the first time. So how about like this neighborhood where there's a lot of Democrats and they didn't vote for me? I'll trade it to you for those Republican neighborhoods that weren't voting for you, and then we're both going to get reelected by really nice margins. It's really the only thing nowadays that Democrats and Republicans are willing to work together on. It's called either the bipartisan redistricting or the incumbent employment protection plan.
The incumbent employment protection
Right, it gives them
plan.
lifetime employment. I mean, if Shaka Fatah had not been, convicted, he would still be, basically he would, till his deathbed, he would still be representing
The
the
congressman.
second congressional district.
Yeah.
There's a number of efforts to change how this is being done.
But how open or receptive is the state legislature to recommendations from the Nonpartisan League of Women Voters and Nonpartisan Common Cause and do-gooders like Dr. Daniel Loeb? Do they listen?
Right. Well, some of them listen. It depends who they are. Well, first of all, it's a two-pronged effort. There's several pieces of litigation going on in order to force people's hand to do the right thing. There's ongoing legislation that maybe we'll get a chance to talk about in Wisconsin and North Carolina, and the League of Women Voters recently filed with Pilcop a case in Pennsylvania. These all will probably end up with the Supreme Court. Already October is going to be the first of the cases, the
U.S. Supreme Court.
The U.S. Supreme Court, and perhaps the Pennsylvania Supreme Court in the case of ours. It's the League of Women Voters case is going to the Court of Common Pleas because that's the court of jurisdiction for these things in Pennsylvania. But it will, no matter who loses, it will go to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, and then perhaps it'll go to the U.S. Supreme Court.
U.S. Supreme Court.
So if people aren't receptive, the courts might be receptive. The other factor is, and I've been working on this a long time, I think this is perhaps the best opportunity to get a legislative solution. In some states, a legislative solution is not as onerous. In some states like California, there's a referendum process, which is fairly easy. In California, typically, there's dozens, if not 100 referendums on the ballot. It's very complicated to do the voting, but if there's a popular referendum, it will get enacted. And that's how they got an independent redistricting commission. Arizona also has one. Iowa has one.
Who's on Pennsylvania's redistricting commission? Have they been appointed yet?
Well, in Pennsylvania, the redistricting is done in two ways. The state House and the state Senate are redistricted by a 5-person commission, who are the 4 leaders of the House and Senate, the Democratic and Republican House leader, Democratic and Republican Senate leader, or they're duly represented. I mean, they can nominate, they can name somebody else to sit in their in their place.
Which they would never do because they
No,
like the power.
Well, I mean, as long as they trust that person, they might, because there's a lot of technical skill required in drawing maps. And I mean, the demographics and the computers are complicated. So often they will name somebody else. Then they're supposed to agree on a fifth person. Now, since they made the rule that they were supposed to agree on a fifth person, they have never agreed on a fifth person. So, because that
What do
person,
they do? They go 1, 2, 3, and
well, so in the case that they don't agree on a fifth person, the Supreme Court is supposed to name somebody. And
was it paper, scissors, rock? Is that what they do?
That might work. I mean, in actually most state law, if there's an equality at the end of an election, there's a game of chance involved.
Well, often, and people are always shocked at this, they draw numbers from a coffee can to see the number you get on the ballot. I mean, that to me was always shocking, because if you've got like 20 people running for 2 seats, the people who draw numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, they have the best shot at getting elected. And somebody who's down at the bottom of the ballot has no chance at all.
Especially for a low-level race, for school board.
I don't want to say low level, because the local elections, those people have more of an influence on our daily lives than the presidential election, than the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Congress. But people don't realize that.
Right.
It's not a sexy sell to tell people to come out and vote for a school board, for local township commissioners.
Right. And this is actually a place where you can plug local media like this studio, because on the national news, you'll be lucky if they mention Pennsylvania at all. In the Philadelphia Inquirer, they're going to talk about Pennsylvania, but they're not going to talk about who's running in
Radnor.
in Radnor, Ward 2 of Radnor. That's not. I mean, if it reaches the level of interest of the Philadelphia Inquirer, it's because there's a major scandal going on.
That's true.
You should be very unhappy if Radnor's some local election is being mentioned in the national news. But
and Fatah, because he was redistricted, he also was representing Lower Merion. And because he's no longer the congressman, Dwight Evans now, and that's a strange mix of districts for him also, because he's got like Northwest Philly, and then I think he has Winfield, and then he has Lower Merion, parts of Lower Merion Township.
Right.
So that's also a strange hybrid.
Right, and in order to represent a district well, you have to be acquainted with its different interests and concerns and its needs.
And the economy and the store owners and so on.
And if you have if there's a district, if part of Lower Merion is just a little corner of somebody's district, then the people of Lower Merion aren't going to necessarily the township board of commissioner isn't necessarily going to be that well acquainted with him, and he's not going to be well acquainted at all with the board of commissioners. So it's certainly a problem about represented and being represented. The notion of being able to petition your elected representatives is enshrined in our Constitution. But if you have some district with tentacles reaching across the state, then it's a sort of a theoretical right to petition your legislator, because even if he deigns to hold a town hall meeting, the town hall meeting is going to be the other end of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So
but also there was a time, I don't know if it's still true, that Lower Merion had been sliced up into 4 different pieces of the pie. So they had 4 different state representatives. It's not that big a township, Lower Merion, that you needed 4 people to represent it.
So in 2010, the Supreme Court was controlled by the Republicans. So the 5th person was named by the Supreme Court, because the 4 people didn't agree, was a Republican. And the 2 Republicans and the 5th person, the special master from the Supreme Court, they came up with a plan, and they did not show the plan to the Democrats until about half an hour before the vote. And the way they showed this was the plan, which is a picture, right?
Okay.
But they didn't show it to them this way. They showed it to them through. If you ever did you ever get read the title to your house? It says
it's Greek to me.
Right. It says your house is a tract of land in the county of Montgomery, delimited on the west by the 34th parallel, delimited on the right by a arc of radius 50 meters, centered at this point. Anyhow, it's like 200 pages of geographical mumbo jumbo. It doesn't say who lives there. It just says what these lines are and some geographic markings, and so on. And they were expected to vote on this, and of course it went by a party line vote.
Where are you testifying next?
Well, we've been going around
because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
So
the Wisconsin case, which is coming before the Supreme Court, there's been a number of what's that called? Amicus briefs.
Friends of the court.
Friends of the court. So one of the amicus briefs was written by we have here by Whitford, and he's done an amicus briefs on a number of successful litigations. To the point that in one case, I think in Virginia, when they overthrew the plan, they named him to be the one to draw the new map when the legislature refused repeatedly to get it right.
I hope they don't stick you with that job, Dan, although I hope you're successful in having fair districting. Our guest today has been Dr. Daniel Loeb, and we'll see everybody next week.